This is Candace 2. This year's surprise model is going to be revealed in a matter of days, and I personally am so excited. From reading through posts on social media, it almost feels like half the hobby wants the surprise to be Othello, and the other half wants it to be Hamilton. Both halves want it to be their model so much. I wanted to talk about this year's top 10 candidates, which we've got thanks to the hard work and research done by Stormy Strike for her 2022 surprise speculation video. I'll link to that in the description so you can watch it after, if you haven't already. I also wanted to add back in a few speculations of my own, mostly for fun. There is so much to talk about as far as patterns and surprise model history, and I started making a video about that months ago, but here we are, right up against BreyerFest. So I decided to save all that for a later release and just get some thoughts out about this year's surprise. I'm putting this disclaimer here again. I don't know anything about the surprise, I might be wrong, and this is all just for fun. The name of this year's surprise was revealed on January 11th, 2022, and since then we've all been making guesses as to what it means, if anything. We all know Breyer likes to keep the surprise top secret until that first person opens one, and they usually don't let any hints slip beforehand. So rotating might mean something, but it probably doesn't. Draft might mean something, and it might not. The only definite we get here is that it is in fact a surprise. Rotating draft does mean rotating in and out seasonal ales, and this ties into Oktoberfest, which is a beer festival held in Germany in the fall, and Prost, our theme for the year, is an expression used when toasting. Side note, the name of the surprise had to do with toasting in 2020 and 2014. Those three things tie together nicely, but it doesn't mean they have anything to do with the model or the different colors used for the surprise. Here are this year's top 10 speculated contenders for the 2022 surprise model, according to Stormy Strike's video. 10. Goffert. 9. Show Jumping Warmblood. 8. Emerson. 7. Carrick. 6. Cleveland Bay. 5. Salinero. 4. Wixom. 3. Hamilton. 2. Brishin, and 1. Othello. I personally like some of these models more than others, and I would admittedly be happier to receive some more than others. But I also want to take opinion out of the conversation and just look at some facts. I decided a way to do that might be a sort of points system for the molds, and to give them all an equal playing field. I also really want to stress that while I am subtracting points from these models, I am not trying to disprove this list. The research is there, and Stormy has correctly named our surprise model 6 out of 7 times. This is just me opening up some additional dialogue in anticipation of the surprise. So let's begin all models at 10 points, and then using some research of my own, which again I'll hopefully wrap up and share eventually, I will add or subtract points to see what we're left with. First up, Goffert. This mold needs a stand, so I'm deducting 1 point. In 12 years of surprise models, the mold needed a stand once. I'm not saying it's impossible, and I'm only subtracting a point because the odds have shown to be against it. This mold was last used as a regular run decorator in 2020, and before that a CC web special in 2018. 2 years in between uses is a long time, but not outside the window of time between a mold's last use and becoming a surprise. Most surprises had their mold used the year prior. I'm giving this an NA because it's not outside the range, but it's not an average length either. Plus 1 point for being a Moody mold. In the 12 years of surprise models, there have been 6 artists' molds used. Kathleen Moody's have been used 4 times. It could be coincidence, as some artists have produced more molds than others, but for now, this adds a point. Plus 1 for being an auction model in 2021. If we count surprise models from 2011 and later, so 11 total, which is all of the surprises minus the very first one, 5 out of 11 of them have been used as a one-of-a-kind model in the auction the year prior to becoming a surprise. 6 if you count the polo version of Smarty, 7 if you count the volunteer model on Roxy, and 8 if you just look for the mold, which includes a glossy test run Carter on Dundee. The auction might not have anything at all to do with the surprise model, so I'm not going to subtract points for not being one. One thing is certain though, so far, the mold has never been used in auction as a one-of-a-kind piece the same year it's been a surprise. For now, because the odds favor it, plus 1 point to being a 2021 auction model. As far as fitting the theme, it seems Breyer uses models that loosely fit, but gives them names that do fit. Because the mold is a light draft and could be seen as a cold blood cross of some sort, I added a point. Goffert ends pretty strong at 12 points. Next, show jumping warm blood. Minus 1 point here too for the stand. He was the celebration model for 2020, which does not exclude him from being a surprise. But that was the most recent use of the mold. Before that it was 2018 as a special event model, and before that a decorator in 2017. This also seems like an NA situation as 2 years falls within the window, but it's right on the edge of being outside of it. Plus 1 point for being a Susan Carlton Sifton model, as SCS models have been used 3 times as surprises before. Plus 1 for fitting the theme, as there are warm blood breeds from Germany. I also really like the possibility of mane tail variations within the surprise. This leaves the show jumper at 11 points. On to Emerson. The mold does not need a stand, plus 1. The mold is a current regular run and was a late spring CC web special, plus 1. This is another Susan Carlton Sifton model, so plus 1. The model was recently used as a one-of-a-kind auction model, which feels like the sort of use that normally Breyer wouldn't let occur so close to the surprise being revealed. So, minus 1. However, I heard BreyerFest is planned 2 years in advance, and this model was made for Ukraine relief, which was an emergency. In that case, it makes me think blanks could have been left around the factory from test paints for the surprise. Or perhaps for an auction model. But so far, there is not an Emerson in this year's auction. He was available during last year's auction, if you're looking for just the mold. For these reasons, plus 1 point. Emerson is leggy, but perhaps he could be a Bavarian warm blood, so plus 1 for fitting the theme. Emerson stands at 14 points. And Carrick. No stand, plus 1. The mold was a regular run that retired in 2020. Carrick was used before that as the celebration model in 2018, which again does not DQ the mold from being a surprise. Before that, Carrick was Cortez, another RR that retired in 2017, and before that, a BreyerFest volunteer model. This old use mixed with BreyerFest use feels like a plus 1 and a minus 1 for another NA. Plus 1 for being a Susan Carlton Sifton mold. Plus 1 for being a mold that could pose as a German warm blood breed, like Hanoverian or Oldenburg, probably better than Emerson can. Carrick lands at 13 points. On to the Cleveland Bay. No stand, plus 1. This mold's use mimics Carrick's in that it was a celebration model for 2019, and before that, an RR that retired in 2017. The fact that it was used recently for BreyerFest negates the fact that it hasn't seen a release in a while. NA. The mold was sculpted by Karen Y. Gerhardt, whose work has never been a surprise before, so while that doesn't add a point for familiarity, it's not applicable to deduct a point for a new artist either. Breyer will rotate in new artists eventually. Plus 1 for being a good warm blood model that also works as a light draft or draft cross and fits the theme. This mold also offers mane and tail variations. The Cleveland Bay finishes at 12 points. On to Salinero. The mold uses a stand, so minus 1. The mold was an RR that was retired in 2020. Before that, the uses were few and far between. I'm doing an NA here again because while it was quite a while ago, that one use was within the window. +1 for being sculpted by an artist Breyer has used the work of for a previous surprise. +1 for fitting the theme perfectly, as this mold was created specifically as a German breed. However, Breyer just announced to save the date for a CC special event, and this mold is used as the event model. I have never seen a model used as a surprise and an event model within the same year. I can't say Breyer would never do that, but because it's never been done before, I think this DQs Salinero. Now, Wixom. No stand, +1. Wixom was used last year in the Birds of a Feather series, so +1 for recent use. The mold was sculpted by artist Donna Cheney, so while that's not a +1 for an artist who's been used before in the surprises, we don't subtract for it either. This mold definitely fits the name of the surprise and could be a German draft breed or a cross, so +1 there. Wixom totals 13 points. Next up, Hamilton. No stand, +1. This mold has definitely seen some recent uses, so +1. It was sculpted by Jennifer Scott, and again, not subtracting for a different artist to the surprises, and this might actually be the year Breyer rotates in a new artist's work, but for now, NA. As far as the theme, the American Saddlebred is, of course, an American breed, so he doesn't truly fit the theme. Although Breyer will use whichever models they feel are best for that time, so it's not impossible. Because we're strictly talking theme and fitting or not, this does warrant a -1. This mold was an auction lot for 2021, and so far the odds favor a mold being in the auction the year before becoming a surprise. +1. If you've been watching the 2022 auction lots closely though, you'll likely have noticed lot number 16, which is Hamilton. Hamilton is DQ'd. Britain. No stand, +1. The most recent use was Kingfisher in May, which might normally have been too close to BreyerFest this year for the surprise, though they used an alternate version of the mold, so I think some of us were still hoping the mold had a chance. The Cobb version was used as BreyerFest SR in 2020, and recently as RR Unicorn and Vanner, so +1 for recent use of the feathered version of this mold. This is a Kathleen Moody horse, so +1. The mold definitely fits the name of the surprise and could be a draft horse used to pull Oktoberfest keg wagons or beer carts, +1. But in the history of surprise models, none have ever been an auction lot that same BreyerFest, and this mold was announced as lot number 12. Due to that, I think the mold is disqualified. Lastly, from the original top 10, Othello. No stand, +1. The mold was recently used as Ash in BreyerFest 2020 and as an RR Unicorn, +1 for recent use. He is a Moody horse, +1. He fits the name of the surprise and could be a German draft cross or at least an Oktoberfest wagon drafter, +1. The mold was also used as auction lot number 7 last year, so +1. Othello finishes really strong at 15 points. Really quick, I did want to talk about Shenandoah. This mold has been a surprise guess in the hobby, and even won the Mares in Black March Madness event as the top vote for the surprise. But his recent use as Cardinal in January might push him out of the running. He was also revealed to be the next Vintage Club release, and he's a current auction model for 2022, which might just DQ him, so I don't have him listed here. Now I'd like to add in a few of my own guesses and total some points for them as well. I really wanted to add a mold that would suit wild Duelmänner ponies, but there just isn't one. Duelmänner ponies are a wild and endangered breed in Germany, which would have been really neat to highlight. Desatato has a wild look about him, but he's probably a little too big and will also be the Halloween model this year, which will likely be shown and talked about during BreyerFest. Connemara feels too dainty and feminine, and her last two releases were Gambler's Choice. Misty is too small to be a surprise, and Flash already was one. So, to leave the ponies behind and make an official guess, I'm going to add strapless. This mold's last use as a BreyerFest SR 2 years ago puts it just inside that strange time window, and having no recent RR use other than protocol in 2019 gives the mold an NA. Side note, Dundee was a BreyerFest special run in 2019 and went on to be the surprise in 2021, just 2 years later, so it's not impossible for strapless to do the same. This mold gets a +1 for being self-standing and a +1 for being a Sommer-Prosser model. Sommer's work has been used before as a surprise. It also gets a +1 for being a warm blood that could work as a German breed. Strapless also offers mane tail variations that could be a fun mix in the surprise. Strapless totals 13 points. My next guess, the Cantering Warm Blood. I do know this mold was used as the celebration model last year, but I want to think outside the box for just a minute. This wasn't initially meant to be the celebration model for 2021. At the end of October 2020, less than 9 months away from BreyerFest, Breyer announced that Intuit, the scheduled celebration horse for 2021, had withdrawn from the agreement. Intuit is a quarter horse and might have been on an entirely different mold, which would have left this model open for use as a future SR. I heard that these events are worked on 2 years in advance, so this mold could have been set up as the 2022 surprise this whole time. It wasn't until January that Danny was announced as that year's celebration model, just 7 months away from the event. This warm blood mold has been used recently as the German breed Holsteiner, which fits the theme perfectly. The RR Catch Me counts as a recent use. The mold is by an artist not previously used, so an NA there. And at this point, you might know where I'm going with this. I was literally editing the end of this video when more auction lots were discovered online, and guess who is lot number 9 in this year's auction? And DQ the warm blood. Cool. For my next guess, I wanted to get back on that same train of thought. I'm gonna add Geronimo. This is me thinking from a production standpoint. What if Geronimo was meant to be used as the withdrawn celebration model for quarter horse Intuit? Breyer certainly would have a lot of blanks of him already made by the time the owners withdrew, and all of those blanks would just be sitting there, unused. Some of them could have been painted, true, but certainly overseas production would have already began on thousands and thousands of celebration models. So, if Breyer had a bunch of blank Geronimos, what better way to utilize those than painting up over 7,000 surprise models? Geronimo made a very nice CC Web special in 2019 as Ambrose, a BreyerFest prize model in 2018 as Cloverleaf, a BreyerFest special run in 2017 as Saffron, and a BreyerFest raffle model in 2016. He's had a recent release as a new RR Oren Mixer model and a very comfortable life within BreyerFest. The artist's work has been used as a surprise before, and though the mold isn't officially a warm blood, he seems versatile enough that he could fit in. His pose is very similar to Nicholas and Chablis, however, which might prevent his use. Otherwise, Geronimo has 13 points. So, here is where all the molds mentioned land as far as points toward being the surprise. This is all based on what we've seen in past surprise uses, but honestly, Breyer can do whatever they want, and any relevancy here could honestly just be garbage. Breyer is carefully curating a collection of special runs for an event, so they're going to pick the mold they feel works best, paired with the auction lot, the SR and LE choices, and the theme. If we're talking opinion, which I tried to avoid while adding and subtracting points, I feel Emerson, though the mold scored high and I do love the mold, doesn't feel right as far as a surprise for this year. Othello scored highest, and I love that mold too, so I'd love him as the surprise. But is he too old? Too big? Is draft too obvious? Breyer did tell us they wouldn't reveal anything until the first one is opened. Showjumper scored low, but will that mold be the one that wins? We've got warm bloods, ponies, and draft horses in this year's mix, so it's hard to say which way the surprise will fall. I do think, though, if Breyer gave us a draft breed for a surprise that had draft in the name, no one would be upset.